we are.
Tim, Ed. Just going to wait a few more minutes to give members of the committee a chance to join.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good idea. Sounds good.
I just got a couple more. It's only 6:29, so. Max, is this your first meeting that you're hosting?
Yes, for you guys, yes. I've done a few others, but not too many.
Okay.
Yes. First time with this headset, though. I finally was able to get it up and running. So we'll see how that
Okay,
goes.
and you're going to give instructions how people.
Yes, absolutely. I'll do that.
Okay, when we start, great. Okay. All right, let's see, we're up to, oh, we just joined, so up to 16. Let's see, Rita,
Oh, good.
Ed, but we still don't have, still missing committee members. That's all right, Valerie.
Barbara, I see your hand up. I am looking for you to unmute you. Go ahead.
I'm here, but you can't see me.
Okay, let's see. Okay, so we have a nice representation. All right, one more minute, Max, and then you'll give your spiel and then we'll get going.
Sounds good.
Okay, Max, why don't we start?
Sure. Okay. Sounds good. So welcome, everyone. If this is your first time joining us, everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting except committee co-chairs, Sherry and Anthony, and the presenters. Following the presentation, co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon, pressing raise hand, and that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen for most of you. And that's not the wave or the thumbs up button. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're on the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting and so the co-chairs, once the co-chairs call on you, and you'll have to manually unmute from that point. As for the chat is for technical support only and help with the Zoom software problems, not quite to ask questions of the co-chairs, so raise your hand for that. If you have an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to the participants section at the bottom of your screen where you will find the raise hand feature. It's the same feature. Some of you may not have updated Zooms yet. And please, lastly, don't raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing Will's screen and off we go. Go ahead, Sherry and Anthony.
Okay. On behalf of, I'm Sherry Weiner, and on behalf of myself and my co-chair, Anthony Cohn, we'd like to welcome you to this meeting of the Voting Reform Task Force. Last fall, we were very busy teaching everybody how to do absentee ballots and voting and write-in ballots. That was our big issue. And now that we're past that, we are now going to address some of the issues that were raised in the last election cycle, which was a lack of voting sites for early voting and also for election day. So let me give you a little background how we got here today. I know the task force, when Craig was the chair, had been talking about polling sites, and we've been talking about it. But what has happened recently is that Councilmember Ben Kalos has formed a committee to make recommendations to the Board of Elections for early voting and voting locations, actually through Manhattan. And Alita and I are on that committee working with Councilman Kalos. At the last meeting, we were asked, the community board members were asked to go back to their community boards and come up with recommendations for both election day voting sites and early voting sites. So how I'm going to run the meeting tonight. First, we'll start talking about election day sites. We have finally got from the Board of Elections a list of the current voting sites, which we're going to put up. And then I had asked members of the community board, 8 voting task force, to kind of look around their neighborhoods and see if they could come up with recommendations. And we had the recommendations, the criteria rather, from the Board of Elections. So what we're going to do is go through what people's recommendations, compare them to the criteria, and see which we should recommend And then depending upon how our meeting goes, we may want to make a resolution to the full board to present these recommendations to the Board of Elections. So Max, why don't you put up the full list of voting districts, voting sites. So it's done by assembly districts. So it's assembly district 73, 76, and 68, which is the little tip of. So let's take a look at these, and then we're going to go over the criteria.
Sure, give me one moment to share my screen.
Okay.
Right one, and tell me if you can see it and if it's the correct one.
Okay.
Are you able to see?
That's not the correct one.
Ah, okay.
This is the early one. I don't want the early one yet. We're going to do the longer one.
Okay, this one then.
Okay, so keep that up for, all right, keep that up. Is there any way you could do the criteria and this?
You mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah, let's do this one first. No, keep on. I wanted just the criteria. I wanted to go over that.
Oh, this one, this
one,
Board of
yeah.
Elections poll site. Yes.
Let's do Board of Elections poll site
Sure.
requirements. Let's go over that. So this is what, when we asked what criteria is used by the Board of Elections. So an area of 500 square feet or more. It has to be ADA accessible as determined by the Board of Elections. It has to have electric outlets, which is good. It has to be available the few days in the year when elections are held. It has to be open from 5 a.m. until election activity at the site is concluded, which is usually about 10 o'clock. Voting equipment will be shipped and picked up from the site prior to and shortly after Election Day. And upon determining the suitability of the facility as an official poll site, they will provide a lease agreement. And then Rita pointed out a very important requirement, bathrooms, which they don't have on the list, but as Rita pointed out, poll workers are there all day and they need poll sites. Okay, so this is the criteria we're going to use to evaluate recommendation. So let's take a look at the existing sites. Max, can you go to that?
This one that I have up, or the Excel spreadsheet?
Not this one, the other one. This is early voting. There we go. Okay, so these are the current locations. Can we move that down? I don't think there's much on 68 sure. Is the tip. Let's go down to 73 and 76.
70. Yep. Okay.
Keep on going. I did send this out to committee members just before the meeting, so you do have an email of it if you want to look at that. So keep on going down, Max, to get to, let's go down to 73. Okay, I guess, why don't we open it up and take recommendations? I know Michelle said she had some she wanted us to consider. Michelle, do you want to tell us what you came up with? Max, can you unmute Michelle Beerbaum?
Sure. Okay, go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Sherry and Anthony. So I came up with a couple that are not on this list. They may need a little adaptation. I think they fit the criteria. For example, the Mech Museum. Now, the Met has the ground floor entrances. As you face the steps, you have an entrance on the left side and on the right side. As you enter into their hallways, they do lead to galleries, they lead to classrooms. but they do have bathrooms. They are handicap accessible. And I think that on either side of the Met, that those spaces can be converted to polling sites. They have the square footage. I think they may not be the largest polling sites, but I think they can be used. Another one I had was the AMC Theater on 86th Street. Now, we don't know what's going to happen to that theater going forward, but I don't think anything will happen to it for the coming election. Theater owner might be very happy to have it rented out. I think that the Board of Elections does pay some money to a facility to rent the space. I'm not quite sure about that. But the lobby area and the theaters, there are bathrooms, they're handicapped accessible. There's an elevator to the second floor, so that might be usable. Also, on 59th Street, the tennis bubble. We've argued about that tennis bubble in the Parks Committee for years now, but there it is. It's being used for private use, but it is on park land. It's 59th Street, so it's sort of halfway in our district, but I think the tennis bubble could work very well. The other thing is the Central Park Arsenal. Now, I'm assuming that there's a handicapped way to get in there. The main entrance is down steps on the Fifth Avenue side, but I'm sure there's a pathway from, the 68th Street entrance to the park or whatever. That would make it accessible, and that also would have handicap availability. The other thing is the Whitney, the museum, the basement level, which is a restaurant, or was. I don't know how much of it is functioning now, or whether or not they'll even be able to open it again once things open up, but there is a big space down there. And the handicapped entry there is you would walk straight in the main entry and take an elevator down one floor. The same could be said for the Guggenheim, except that restaurant space is more awkward. The Whitney space is a more sort of a squared off space that I think would lend itself better. And lastly, the Park Avenue Methodist Church basement. That's the church just east of Park Avenue on the south corner of 86th Street. That has, while there are a couple of steps going up to the main entrance, they do put out a ramp, a little portable ramp so people could have entry. And then there is an elevator there that would take them down to the basement, or they actually have a third floor, which is a meeting room. It's set up as a meeting room. They use it for a meeting room. The chairs are foldable. And so I believe that space could be cleared out and used as well.
Wow, that's quite a list. Thank you. You're really.
Well, I also thought of empty storefronts, being a little more vague about that. Unfortunately, there are going to be a lot of them. What the technicalities are for having a landlord open that, and the insurance of having the public in such a space, and who's responsible for it, and et cetera, et cetera. So while we'll have a lot, we have to consider on a space by space basis as to whether or not they fulfill the other criteria of space, and that their bathrooms are on the main floor, et cetera, et cetera.
I think let's discuss the need for, I think we're talking about an election June 22nd. So we're still not going to have herd immunity. Do you think that people are going to vote on election day? Or do you think we're going to have the same situation as we did previously, where people are going to do vote in and early voting?
Well, if you're asking me, I would very much like to answer that. I think that mail-in voting, without us having addressed any of the issues of the mail-in voting in the prior election, in this committee and in this board, we haven't discussed it at all. And I think that probably should be on, our very next agenda at a coming up meeting. But I think we need to address who the mail-in ballots actually go to, because we don't have any evidence that our election rolls have been cleaned up. And I personally have friends, one of whom who had received in addition to her own, a mail-in ballot that was for her husband who had passed away 3 years before, and to her son who hadn't lived at that address and even in the state for the past 35 years. So to encourage mail-in ballots, and we're not talking about absentee ballots. Absentee ballots is a different thing because we request that and they require a signature. But to just talk about mail-in ballots and encourage that, to me, is very concerning. I think with social distancing and the masks and whatever, we could probably handle in person. And if we think we have to make allowances for mail-in, I think we have to very, very quickly address that, because we haven't addressed any of the issues that came up in the last election.
Okay. All right. So why don't we have some conversation about this, and then we'll go back to consider Michelle's and other recommendations. The next hand up
I think
see is,
I think
Go
I
ahead.
saw Alita definitely next, and then after that, I wasn't so sure.
okay, we can do Alita, sure, because she's involved with me with the task force. Okay, let's call in Alita.
Thanks, Shari. Thanks, Max. This isn't really addressing Michelle because I have no idea what people are going to want to do in terms of voting, but I just wanted to mention, I didn't see it on the list, that anything for early voting, which is 10 days, needs to be available for the entire 10 days.
Yeah, that we're going to do that next.
Okay.
That's a separate we're going to do that. We have the list of available early voting. This is just going to be election day voting.
Okay, and then is Marymount now permanently on the list as an option?
Yes.
Yes.
We're gonna-
Michelle said yes. Someone said yes.
Well, we may have a surprise visitor tonight with an announcement tonight.
And then the last thing was a suggestion, but for a place. But if you want me to wait, I'll wait.
Yeah,
Otherwise-
let's wait. Let's do early voting second, because I think that's the bigger problem
Well,
than
this
than
could be
the election day.
This could be for any voting, which is Wallace Hall at Loyola Church, the St. Ignatius Loyola Church. They have a basement. They've recently made it accessible. There are also outdoor stairs, and it's completely separate from the church, from the where the congregation meets for services, so that
Okay.
it wouldn't interfere with people attending as churchgoers. It's underneath the building and it's now accessible. And it's quite a large space because PS6 had its auctions there. So thank you.
Okay. All right, let's go to Ed.
Go ahead, Ed.
Thanks, Sherry. Thanks, Max. No, I was just going to, I raised my hand about the locations, and I'm sure that Marymount, like Alita mentioned, is probably on there, and I would imagine that Wagner Middle School, close by me, is probably also on there. But and I was looking through my email, so you'll have to excuse me, but I was listening to Michelle and looking for the spreadsheet at the same time. But I thought I heard something Michelle was saying about mail-in ballots and absentee ballots. Those are the same thing. Mail-in ballots and absentee ballots. I mean, those are, there's no difference there. That's just different nomenclature. But an absentee ballot is mailed in. There's no distinction for that, unless Michelle is referring to the governor's executive order giving everybody an excuse-free absentee ballot for the last cycle. And a lot of people use that as mail-in ballots, but I wanted to dispel any confusion as to any distinction between mail-in and absentee ballots. There is none. Anyway.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Ed and everyone, the spreadsheet is actually linked in the chat. So if you wanted to open up the spreadsheet and look all the way up and down it, you can click on the link in the chat.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Will.
Okay, let's go through, let's do committee members first. Lynn? Committee board members, Lynn?
Oh, there you are.
Strong?
Go ahead, Lynn.
Hi, thank you, Sherry. So we did have some issues on Roosevelt Island with the early voting and just with voting. One of our sites wasn't open, and I didn't get a clear, really good response on whether the residents of Kohler Hospital really had an opportunity to do either primary and early voting. I think this is super problematic. It in the past was a voting site, and it came off of all of the lists after COVID. And my understanding is they did some mail-in voting there, but it was at the discretion of the employees of the facility. So I still have some concerns on how many people really had the opportunity to exercise their voting rights. My other concern was that the at-risk populations that we had in our community were unable to do early voting because many of them never left Roosevelt Island. And again, I wasn't clear on how many of them really received the early voting information. And I know that our Disabled Association had some issues with trying to do any of the early voting. We were able to have PS 217, which has been a standard site in the community for many years, but we did lobby very extensively with the Board of Elections to have another to have an early voting site here in the community. We showed them multiple locations that fit the criteria, and they still did not go forward with a voting site. So we were really disappointed, and we'd like to know what could help facilitate that advocacy going forward. Thank you.
But you do have a voting site on Roosevelt Island.
We have one voting site, that's correct.
Yeah, but no early voting. Okay.
No early voting. And that voting site is specifically PSIS 217, which was available. For those of us who did early voting, we had to go to Wagner. That was our catchment area. And we have a very high population of people with disabilities and seniors and impaired seniors. And so that was very, they just were not able to do any early voting. And I think everyone that wants to should be given the opportunity. So I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, all right, well, we'll certainly add that to the list. All right, let's continue to get comments. I'm still gonna do community board members. So Valerie is next, Valerie Mason.
I am looking for, there we go. Go ahead, Valerie.
Hi, well, I don't know if this applies to election day or early voting, so I'll just put it out there. I mean, we do have a number of hospitals and none of them are on the list, and they're open 24/7 and they have bathrooms, and I know they have a lot of auditoriums. So I'm sure that they could be available for a site as well, whether it's Rockefeller University or any of the other hospitals in the neighborhood. I don't know if you're going to distinguish between early voting, but I think it would be helpful too, in terms of this discussion, to know how many people in our district actually voted early last spring. So we have real numbers and can figure out where there really is a necessity for additional locations, because some of them probably lend themselves to more location than others. And I think too, I don't know, I hear what you were saying, Michelle, but I have to think that what your friend got were not a ballot, but an application for a ballot. And there's a big difference. And people don't know unless they open them exactly what they are, because you wouldn't even have gotten an application for a ballot unless you were registered Democrat. So I think there was a lot of confusion about that. People waited to open those envelopes to vote, and then they found out they were just the application. But neither here nor there. I don't know what's going to happen this next round, but I would say, look, I didn't go and do my own survey, but I would say that somebody should poll the hospitals and see what auditorium they have available for, maybe not so much for election day, but for early voting, because again, those would be disabled, accessible as well.
Okay, continuing down the list, Rita Popper, please.
I don't have any new places to recommend, but I do say that a place that is only accessible by an elevator should be out because of what can happen with an elevator, and then you can't get to the site. And besides, we'd be pushing a lot of people in to one area, and that would the social distancing. And the other thing is to consider lighting. On that AMC theater, that lobby is has very low lighting. It's very difficult. The ballots are very, very, very tiny type. So those are other things that I think that we have to look at when we're looking for sites.
Okay, good point. Where Craig later.
Go ahead, Craig.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to mention my experiences because I didn't know if this would just help provide a little insight and a few of my just thoughts that I had. One of the things that I think stuck in my mind back in November for the general election was just the disparity between the Jackie Robinson complex and Wagner. I was lucky in that I was on the essentially the border of where the and I was on the side of the border where people were assigned to Jackie Robinson for early voting, and I was literally in and out in 5 minutes, and I was shocked. And then I walked over to Wagner, having heard what was going on, and it was the circus with the 2-hour loop, double loop around the block, and no one really knowing what was going on experience. And this was 3 days into the early voting. So while I think it's really important that we find additional locations, I think it's also important for us to try to figure out if there's any type of after action review that we could do to understand just why there is such a disparity in the experience. And part of it had to do with the number of people that were assigned to each location. But I recall looking at the numbers, I was just trying to pull up my notes, and I don't believe that was even necessarily it, that there was a disparity, but it wasn't such a great disparity where it was just a matter of how people were assigned to it. The other thing that I think during the process that really surprised me, going back to some of the questions raised about the absentee ballot applications, was we received a political mailing with our names that had been filled in, that I believe that was to submit the application for early voting. And I very much resented that and thought that was almost an invasion of privacy where we already had that filled out for ourselves. And it was sponsored, it was part of a political mailing, as I said. And I think that turns off people. And I don't think those are really particularly helpful when there are already mailings that could be requested elsewhere and the city sends out information. And I think people generally knew that early voting was an option. So I just want to raise that alarm, if you will, because I think that was something that was inappropriate and could have just affected the thoughts that some people had. In terms of locations, since you mentioned when I was the chair of this committee, we had this whole discussion a few years ago, and I'm glad to see that there are a number of suggestions that were raised tonight. I think we know what the challenges are with getting locations to actually agree to do it. And I think we have to be thinking about this as difficult as it is to do, to think about this in a post-pandemic way, not just June necessarily, because we all know, unfortunately, primary elections are very low turnout, and we're not going to have the issues in terms of of waiting and the whole experience you get during an every 4 years presidential election. But I think we should be thinking about the future and how we deal with these more higher turnout elections, especially, and try to find locations that could help balance out how people are able to vote. And I think one of the things we talked about when I was, just a little reminder, I know we had this conversation, I think it was the last meeting. When we started this committee, I know there was a discussion that we were going to keep it apolitical, and I think we still do that. But I think we now have enough experience knowing what all the issues are that I, from a personal standpoint, I think we need to seriously talk about the things that we were perhaps a little afraid to talk about earlier, because they've now happened, and we've seen the progression on the state side and the city side in terms of early voting, no excuse absentee voting. And I think, as many of us experienced, it resulted in the higher turnout that we all desired. And I think we need to continue along with that theme. People who had that experience to be able to do it without having to worry about the different aspects of going to a voting location, especially this year. It would be like someone having a great taken away all of a sudden. And I think that would be a shame if we were to revert back and lose out on the turnout numbers that we have.
Well, I think we have to be concerned. People who were forced to wait 2 hours to vote last November may be hesitant, to do early voting. So I think we need to address that. All right, let's continue the conversation. Let me get some of the members of the public in. Jordan Walk.
I thank you very much, and I really appreciate the work that the task force is doing. Sorry, it's my first time joining. A couple of thoughts on what Michelle said. A few years ago, the Central Park put in an accessible ramp directly to the Armory in the park. So you just go down ramps from Fifth Avenue. However, it leads to a lower level, which is also handicapped accessible. And I'm not sure that there would be space in there for voting for many people, bathrooms and exhibits. One reaction to the Metropolitan Museum of Art is that it seems to be at the edge of a population group. In fact, it's a very low density population group. So I don't know how many people would make the walk over. I did do early voting down at Wagner for the first opportunity, and it was minutes. It was clearly fewer than 10. It worked very well. There was nobody else there. But given our age and our situation, we both decided that we would never try early voting again, that we were just not going to vote in person. So we voted by mail, and we were very pleased with it. My wife's cycle went much faster than mine. I guess I did the wrong thing. There are other issues that I'm sure you'll be getting to later and maybe beyond the meeting when those are discussed. But again, I really appreciate the work that the task force is doing. I think it will be a help. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Okay, let's go to Rami Siegel.
Hi. So there's a few things that were covered by the previous speakers. First, I would like to say that I was a certified poll watcher for the 2020 general election, and I spent, I think, every single day of early voting at or inside a poll site. And there was a few things that surprised me that were just covered. Someone brought up lighting, and that's definitely an issue, not just with the facility. So, for example, Wagner, the early voting site's in a well-lit gym. There's some windows on the, I guess, the highest point of the room, and there's doorways. But then there's also broken voting machines with a little light, bar light. A second thing, some people have been saying there are 2-hour waits. I think the average time throughout was like closer to 3.5, 4 hours. The longest we saw people waiting there was like 6+, and that was a day in the rain. So if that gives you any context, that was a pretty terrible day. Another thing, Wagner was, during early voting, Wagner Middle School was the largest, more people were assigned to Wagner Middle School than any other place in New York State. It was, I think, a little over 118,000 voters were assigned to vote there. And that in itself was a problem. And it should have been a state board of elections issue, but it ultimately came down to the city saying, hey, like, how many people from different precincts can we cram into this one site? A lot of times the way early voting sites are assigned, so when you get your little card that says where you're supposed to vote, it says your early voting site and your precinct site. They like to combine whole precincts. So if you're assigned to go vote at Eastside Middle School, for example, on election day, they'll cram everyone that has Eastside Middle School on their voting card for election day into a single early voting site, just for simplicity and for zoning reasons. What the problem was back in November was that they crammed way too many whole precincts into the Wagner site. And then on top of that, COVID protocols were lacking, and I actually have a copy of, it used to be on my desk, of the Board of Elections manual, like their training manual, and their COVID protocol was not up to par. They wound up being truly unkind to the janitorial staff at Wagner in the end, by putting whole stickers on the floor and ruining the gym floor, and that was a whole issue in itself. So when you come to a meeting like this and you say, like, hey, what are some sites that might be willing to give their space to Board of Elections? You have to think, like, hey, like, Board of Elections isn't the best and most accommodating guest in your space. And so you also have to consider that from a business owner's perspective. Hey, this is not like, I can't, like, my staff are already overworked as it is with COVID, and they have this extra burden of keeping our people safe. How can we make sure that Board of Elections is nice to them? Another thing that was brought up was absentee ballots and mail-in ballots. Absentee ballot, so for the last election cycle, you had to apply for a mail-in ballot or an absentee, whatever you want to call it, you had to apply for it. So that's what I think Craig was saying, that he got in the mail. He got the application for an absentee ballot from a political campaign, which is legal to do, but I get it, it's frowned upon. It's a little bit invasive. And so one of the things that was new for the 2020 cycle, for both this was discussed during primary 2020, which was June 23rd, 2020, and for the general election, was having drop boxes. So this was something that was done actually all across the country. And so what they said was, anyone that requests an absentee ballot, gets an absentee ballot, fills it out. They don't have to put it in the mailing system, because as we know, there's issues with the Postal Service and interference from the White House and whole production. So you can just bring it to a drop box that was at a polling site, an early voting site that would later be picked up by the Board of Elections. So that's another thing to consider. Any site that we recommend also has to be available to have a drop box at their site. And then, so if you had a mail-in, any kind of ballot that was not an in-person, you filled it out in the precinct ballot, there's drop boxes for that. And I'm the chair of CB8's Youth and Education Committee. And a few meetings ago, we had a mother from Wagner Middle School that came in. And I also spoke to some parents from Wagner Middle School when I was actually at the precinct during early voting, and they had a serious issue with COVID and early voting, and just the chaos that ensued from the all sorts of factors that I just discussed: the mail-in ballots, the COVID, the enormous amount of people, in addition to a lack of staffing by Board of Elections, site managers that weren't able to control anything, no fault to their own, bad weather, all of those factors affected the school. So Wagner has an extraordinary amount of students. I don't know that exact number, but one of this mother, as well as a few other people spoke to me about this, was that if they had so many teachers that were out or teaching remotely that they couldn't run an in-person school if they lost like 3 teachers or something ridiculous like that. And what was happening was a lot of Board of Election staff, no fault of their own, and voters were being invasive into the school, interfering on students' education, and really put the principal in a really tight spot there. This we can never know, but I'm pretty sure it resulted in school closures later on in November. That's just a statement I just made. You gotta fact check me on that. You can't go writing on that.
Okay. All right. I've been waiting to hear from Assembly Member Rebecca Seawright, who thought she was going to join us, but she just let me know that she can't. So she called me this evening to say that she'd gotten Marymount College to agree to be an early voting site again. So that is confirmed. So I think what we need to do is to make sure that the distribution of voters is appropriate. I mean, if you were involved last time, by the time Marymount opened, the voters had already voted. Marymount had, a couple of times I walked by, there was nobody waiting there. So I think we have to make sure that between Wagner and Marymount, that there's a distribution so people don't have to wait 6 hours or whatever at Wagner. But I think that addresses one of the big issues, certainly on early voting. And we have a big thank you to Assembly Member Seawright for getting that approval from the college, which they had not really wanted to do, but she really asked, and they finally agreed. All right, let's keep on going through for initial comments, and then we'll go back again and get more specific. Let's see, the next person is Jill Franco.
Hi, I'm new to this meeting, so thank you for having me. I just want to echo that one had to apply for an absentee ballot or mail-in ballot. So there's some confusion there unless someone in the household fraudulently applied for that absentee ballot. I happen to have worked on voter protection in numerous states for the general election and the Georgia election. And I can tell you, as an attorney who worked in what is referred to as the boiler room in 2 different states, it is shameful that in New York City, early voting lines were what they were. Because we talk about, I worked in North Carolina, I worked in Georgia, and could do that because of the virtual realm we're all operating in. Even the boiler room for attorneys, which usually is a physical space, was virtual. And one of the serious things that happens at polling sites and early voting is long lines. And that's considered serious in states that as New Yorkers, I think we look to in a certain way. And when I heard people for early voting were in line for 6-7 hours, I can tell you that I attribute that first and foremost to the fact people were assigned to a location for early voting like they are on election day. In many states, including the ones I mentioned, early voting, you were able to go to any location in your county. And I think that's a very important thing to consider, that what that allows is people to say, oh, Wagner has no line, I can go there. And it makes a lot more sense, especially even in a place like New York City, where these polls locations are actually very close to each other because we are so population dense. You're not talking about driving 15, 20 miles. So I just put that out there as a point of information. Also, this idea of locations such as museums, I happen coincidentally to be a guide at the Met Museum. So I know their protocol and museum life, you know, from the inside staff side very well. First of all, in normal times, most of our city museums are open 7 days a week. It just so happens that the Met is now not open 7 days a week because of COVID. I think everyone at the Met hopes by June, that they are open more days. We aren't sure what's going to happen, but no one will be able to tell you that it's going to be closed an entire day ahead of time, for instance, now. And secondly, there are major, major security precautions in an institution like the Met, that having a polling site might be a major hurdle, not to mention then you've let the public in and you have the museum and all the other museums you mentioned. It may be a security concern as well as COVID right now, frankly. But also, I think the point that was just made that, you know, typically they are schools and such places because they can handle whether stickers are on the floor and all these kinds of things, that I don't know that institutions such as the Met and their, you know, sister institutions would deal with and can commit to closing down for the day like that. I think it's pretty unrealistic from my inside information. So I thought I'd just share that as well.
Even the lower level that was mentioned?
Yes,
At the
because
Met
that, just so you know, well, first of all, if it's a day that the museum is opened, to be able to control the flow of the public not going up into galleries, when that is a major entrance for the museum, there are 2 entrances for the public. Up the main staircase, which you
Right.
probably all know very well. But then there's the ground level.
Yes.
That's what you're talking about. That is also an entrance for the public. That's a handicap entrance. They themselves have to have an entrance. The Met is not going to have voting there. And by the way, the Whitney, which many of you may have visited as the Met Breuer, is now taken over by the Frick. The Frick is moving in there.
And they're opening up, right?
Yeah, so I just share that, yes, these are maybe physical spaces that are ideal. I think they're unrealistic, but I think perhaps some of the schools that right now are only virtual that we haven't used might be obvious choices. But the hard part is everyone hopes that schools won't be virtual too much longer. So it's hard to know, but the nice thing is public schools are closed on election day. That's what we do know, right? Institutions like the Met are not closed typically. Right now they are closed on Tuesdays, but that's fluid. That's a fluid situation.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful. All right, I'm going to go down. I see there's some people want to speak a second time, but let me go through the people who haven't spoken at all. Lindsay Cormack, please.
I am looking for Lindsay. Oh, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Hi, you'll have to excuse me. I'm in my kitchen doing dinner right now. I worked the polls this year as a poll worker in New York at PS 158, and then I went and worked down in Georgia as well. And there's sort of 3 things that I think I would say about this. In some ways, the early voting fiascos that we had actually made day of voting very, very good. But something that I think could be more uniformly done is the hours of early voting. Because you know how you'd have some days it was like voting doesn't start till noon or voting ends at 4. And so I think some uniformity that says we're going to pick the hours and it's going to be the same would be good. I would also say from like a BOE perspective, there was animosity among poll workers because they got paid the same amount. We all got paid the same amount for days versus hours. And so if you happen to get one of those like days that didn't have that many hours, you were getting paid more than, you know, the long election day that has that big thing. So I think that there's probably an argument to say standardize the hours for each day. And then the other sort of thing that I think I'd say on this is we're gonna really need to figure it out before ranked choice voting, because it's only gonna make our elections longer. Like ranked choice voting is gonna take every individual a more time in the booth to figure out, okay, who's my 1 through 5 for all these different positions. And so I think it's something that like, it's very important and urgent that we figure this out. I don't have great suggestions on the spaces. I think we're in a schools and libraries, not a hospitals and museums institution sort of place, because of the protections that those sorts of places have. And so if we could find, you know, a library space or maybe a church space or something like that, that probably seems better than maybe going down the idea of thinking about hospitals or museums.
We're going to be discussing choice voting, not discussing it, but discussing how we want to plan for it and what programs we want to do after we finish the voting site discussion. So I have that on the agenda so we can figure out what the best way is to educate the public. Thank you for your comments. Let's see. Lindsay, I'm going to do Jill Eisner.
Hi there. Thank you. I'm not going to comment on some of the comments that were made because I worked all 10 days at Wagner and there was a lot of misstatements, and I worked the door out in the freezing cold and the rain. And there's a lot of issues that were not covered here as to why that first 5 days was an absolute fiasco. I demanded that a back door be opened. So we had an exit door. We had every voter coming in and out of the same ramp, which meant that anybody on a cane or a wheelchair had to wait for other people to go. So that was the first issue. 5 days of yelling, and they finally opened the back door. The Board of Elections never came to scope out the school. It had been used in June. I worked early voting in June. I do not know what they did in November. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they didn't have a floor plan. They never wrote one for Wagner. So on day 6, they came and rearranged all the voting booths, tables, and whatever. Disgrace, absolute disgrace. And then the third thing, which nobody thinks about, the Upper East Side is the oldest community in the country that includes the villages in Florida. And they put out a memo without consulting anybody that anybody over 70 could cut the line, except that every single registered voter that votes in Wagner is over 70. So I got yelled at. I had a line 2 hours long of people on canes and wheelchairs. So the Board of Elections, and I ripped their heads off, everybody from the top to the bottom, Republican and Democrat, messed up that voting site. So now on day 7, the press comes with the cameras, and of course now it's running smoothly. So that is a lot of what the problem is. And just one more thing, whoever that young man was talking about the school was locked. We were not allowed in the school. We could not go outside the gym. The doors were sealed, okay? And they weren't teaching there anyway. That was a whole bunch of hooey because there was no classes. But we were given 1 toilet bowl for 60 workers. Male and female shared 1 toilet bowl, okay, at Wagner, because we were not allowed inside to use the bathrooms that are usually used. So, and then they extended the hours every day, 4 hours without asking us, and we didn't get paid for that. So I just want to let you know that this was a lot of structural issues that were happening here at Wagner, the 10 days that I worked there. This had nothing to do with site. I mean, this was the Board of Election not doing their job. So I have been on the soapbox with Ben and with Cindy Doty and all these other people. I'll keep a repeat. Tiffany Townsend, our Manhattan one, that's our commissioner. I keep on discussing this, and I just don't see it changing. So thank you for your time.
Okay. Betty Cordova.
Hi, everybody. I wanted to mention 2 sites. One I didn't see on the list. It has kind of a largish room, which is Asphalt Green. I know there's a lot of kids there. There might be a security issue, but that's one site. The second site is there's a Marriott on 92nd between First and York. It has a very large basement. It has an elevator and stairs and a bunch of bathrooms. So that's the second site. And some other hotel, there might be some other hotels on the Upper East Side, which you might consider. and that might be accommodating in these times. And the last thing I wanted to mention is it might be really helpful if the community board puts out a communication on mail-in ballots, because I think people are generally confused on what to do about them. My husband and I voted on mail-in ballots, and we were fine. And I don't know, he's getting a vaccine and he's going to vote in person. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get a vaccine by then, and I don't know if I'm going to feel comfortable voting in person. So, I don't know, obviously in the June election, I don't know, what would happen. But in any case, I think it would be helpful in general if maybe the community board or somebody else would put something out about mail-ins and would make people feel more comfortable and knowledgeable. Thank you.
Well, you obviously missed our program on early mail-in voting, and you missed my public service announcement. So we were all over early voting.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
We did really address it. We knew it was going to be an issue.
Thank you.
We did a program.
Well, maybe
on
you
how
can repeat it.
We definitely.
I guess. I'll look for it.
Yeah,
I'll look for it, Sherry. Thank you.
Well, we did. We were on that. All right. I'm going to call on committee members who've already spoken. Hopefully, please don't repeat what somebody else has said, and let's try to move through this. We've much more complicated a topic than we still have a lot of way to go. So let's start. Rita, what do you have to say?
I'm about to unmute Rita, but I will just note that we'll just put the PSA about how to complete your absentee ballot in the chat for those that might be interested. And now.
Okay, I did a wonderful job with the PSA.
You did.
We'll have to use it again. All right, Rita, please.
I too am a poll worker, but Knickerbocker Plaza is the part of the community room off the lobby, and that could be used for early voting as well as for voting. And there are both men and women bathrooms with 3 stalls in each bathroom, and it is wheelchair accessible. So I know that Knickerbocker Plaza is down as a voting site, but I think it could also be an early voting site. And that would be at 91st Street and 2nd Avenue.
Okay, great. Good, that's what we need to know. We need people who are on the ground who know these locations. Let's see, Craig?
Hi again. 2 quick things. First, I just want to, I was looking back and confirmed that it was 119,000 people assigned to Wagner and 90,000 assigned to Jackie Robinson. So again, I think that explains some of the difference, but not as much as we may expect, which is why I'm just curious if there are other factors and learning.
Well, if you looked at the chart, it's by geographic area.
Right. But there is still an inequity when you look at the broader statistics across the city. And I would be interested in finding out from Board of Elections or some party that has or someone with knowledge as to how the lines were developed, and if they have any information as to why some places were more successful than others in keeping things in check. But that goes to my next point, which I didn't talk about before, which is we talked about in this committee from the initial meetings, the matter of just better communications. And what I would like to see is more real-time status if possible, that someone would have the ability to, whether it's to go online or call a central number, but to get a sense as to what the wait times are before someone goes down to try to vote. I think there are a few pieces that can help people hopefully allocate their times in ways to know whether it's worth trying to go out, because everyone has their own strategy. And I'm sure part of the issue was everyone was anxious to vote and people were enthusiastic and people were excited to do it as soon as possible. And when the weather was better, we had the opposite strategy where we decided, let's wait a few days, go on a marginal night where there was the threat of rain. And I think that worked to our benefit. And then I know obviously by the end of the early voting week, and of course Marymount helped, things were considerably better, to the point where I heard there were few or no waits over the weekend. But I think that also speaks to being able to understand, if we had real-time statistics showing the number of people that have voted, we could then hopefully extract some of that information, be able to have an idea as to maybe whether it would be beneficial to wait and another time, knowing that people are then going to maybe be motivated to find different approaches. And then again, I don't know if there's a way that people can identify whether they're planning on voting in one way or another. But I think it was not surprising that by the time we got to Election Day, where I heard people say that it was considerably better, it's not a surprise when you had probably the majority of people voting early. And I think that's a lesson for all of us. But the other one last point that I want to say, I know someone mentioned the drop boxes, and we were actually using the drop boxes ourselves for family members who couldn't make it out to early voting. And one of the things that we noticed was that there wasn't really signage alerting people as to where to find it, and you had to try to figure out and speak to people to find where the drop boxes were and what the process were. So I think maybe another lesson learned that we need to better communications as to what the processes are going to be, to in terms of if there are drop-off boxes, locate them and who to speak to and what is necessary. And do you need anything besides just to drop it off? Do you need to sign it or not? Because I honestly didn't know, and I didn't realize how it's literally you drop it off with no questions asked. But again, information is really paramount, and I hope that that's something that we can all learn from this.
Well, I know at Wagner, for the longest time, they had the drop box inside, which created more confusion. They finally moved it outside. So that addresses the point, that you made, that, I mean, people should be, if they don't, of course, we had such concerns about the mail service. So many people didn't want to put it in the mail, but then we didn't make it easy enough for them to find a drop box that they could drop it off. So that's another issue that needs to be addressed. Let's see, Barbara Rudder hasn't spoken yet. Barbara?
Hi. I first want to give a shout out for Jill Eisner. I was online for 3 hours and 15 minutes, so I saw Jill as I was going around a couple of times. I'm surprised she still has a voice even now, months later, because she was keeping everybody in line and moving as best as he can. I was going to say the thing about a drop box. I didn't know that it ever went outside. I was thinking of using the drop box, but the line was there, and to go inside, it didn't seem right. So I wish there would be more on the outside instead. Last time I talked about, my son lives in Denver, and I can't believe they're voting. They do not have inside voting. They have drop boxes all through the city. So you're walking to work or you're going grocery shopping, there'll be a secure drop box for people to put in. And he says they have the second highest number of people voting, and I think it could be right. And I think that this will be a hot election because it is mayor. It is a lot of things, and it is mayor, not as big as, this last election. But I wish we would have almost less days, but more hours and more locations. People had a very tough time going up to, where was Robinson? The hundreds or something. It's just too far. It was too far away for all of them. And I think we need more locations. And one location, when the school on 88th Street was being constructed, they used the Mormon church on 87th Street. I went there to vote, and it was a very good voting place, and maybe they would open that up. 87th, just east of 2nd Avenue, between 2nd and 3rd.
Okay. We have some good,
That was a very good site.
All right, we have some good recommendations. Okay, let's see. Faith Fraser hasn't spoken.
Faith, you'll have to. Oh, there you go.
I'm here. Can you hear me? Hi, this is Faith Fraser. And first of all, shout out to Jill, with whom I worked with many days, and all her heroic efforts outside. I worked at both Wagner and Marymount, and I'll just caution you that Marymount is much, much smaller. I think we did maybe 1,100 people in 2 days. So it's much, much smaller. It'd be great to have it every day. That will help. Also, Wagner was the best site I've ever worked in, with the worst bathrooms, with one unisex bathroom. It was horrendous. And this has been going on for 2 years. There doesn't seem to be a way for poll workers or those in the community who see these problems to help to address them. I mean, I made all sorts of suggestions, just like Jill. Pay the poll workers 1 day extra to debrief and go through all this to reset, because we seem to get to the next spot of the voting, and then all of a sudden we have the same problem. As far as the drop box outside, actually was the first person to volunteer to go out in the rain. And so you have to have a Democrat and Republican, and we got NYPD to let us padlock the drop box to a no parking sign. So that's why it was out there. Another thing, staggered times, they were done on purpose. I think it's actually a good idea not to have standardized times, because a lot of people told us, oh, this is so great, I work earlier in the morning or I work in the afternoon. So I just wanted to say that, and totally agree with Jill. It's really on the Board of Elections to fix this. It took forever. I was calling Ben Kalos, everything, so was Jill, just to get things like, because of COVID, the windows had to be open. It was 35 degrees outside at one point, and it was 45 degrees inside. So we had a lot of issues. I think it's pretty amazing that so many people came to vote. Looking at it from a marketing perspective, because I'm in that business, I think the early voting campaign worked too well. And so when it said avoid the lines, vote early, that also aggravated a lot of people, and I can understand that. So.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Kaz Spagaletti from the community board. Kaz?
Yeah, as far as why do we need to be inside to vote? We've got so much room in Central Park. We've got so much room in Carl Schurz Park. Why not set up mobile voting sites for 1 day, 2 days, or however many? The other one, as far as drop boxes, you have thousands of multi-story buildings. And wouldn't it be better to put a drop box in a building with 300-400 apartments? Then the people don't have to worry about taking a walk, knowing where it is. Use it, put it in the buildings. I'm sure that could be done with proper security.
Well, I think security is an issue, though. I don't know if you could just put a drop box in an apartment building. I think that would be an issue.
But there's cameras in a lot of the buildings, in the foyer. You could have somebody monitor it and lock it up. The security could be no problem, but it's just a suggestion. You would scatter them throughout the city.
All right, well, we'll put it on our list. Thank you. We're going through? All right, this is people who have spoken before. Again, please keep it brief. Michelle Birnbaum.
Yeah. Firstly, let me just say I voted on election day. I voted on 88th between Lex and Park. I walked right in and then I walked right out. It couldn't have been easier. It couldn't have been better. I think it's quite right that there was a lot of over promotion for early voting. I think early voting is an option, but the way it was promoted, it was like that was the real alternative. And that election day was sort of never advocated for. But I would like to say that they should be promoted equally. It was very easy. There was no problem. Also, let me say about drop boxes. Keith Powers is putting a bill in the council to have drop boxes on the street like a freestanding mailbox. They have had this in different parts of the country. There have been some issues with them. Some of them were set on fire, They do have to have security. They do have to have a guard. I guess they have to have party representation. I don't really know how I feel about that as an option, but he does have a bill that he's proposing, and maybe it's something where we could get the actual the actual copy of the actual bill, and we can have a discussion about it. Also, let me just go back with my comment about mail voting versus absentee ballot. What I was talking about, and maybe it wasn't here, this happened to a friend of mine, but it is true. She's in New Jersey. Maybe here in New York State, there was not this just mailing out of ballots, but a lot of states had just mailing out ballots, not absentee, the ones that you request, but just mailing out ballots to households. And in anticipation of that maybe coming here, that's why I'm saying that if we ever consider that, we have really got to clean up the voting rolls. I know that I attempted to do distribution for advocacy, not political, when I was advocating for the historic district on Park Avenue. I used the voting rolls to do hand distribution of notices to every single tenant in every single building. And I used those rolls, and I had personally addressed envelopes and addresses and everything. And I got to the building, and either half the people had died, or they had moved, or half the people weren't there. And those were up to date voting rolls. So as a cautionary tale, if that gets to be something that's going to happen here, where you're not soliciting the ballot, I think we have to talk about that, because the voting rolls would be key to heading off any problems. So I just wanted to share that, and maybe let's look for Keith's bill and see exactly what he's proposing.
Okay, I see Adam Bermanix from Ben Kalis's office. Do you want to give us any direction, what you would like to come out of this meeting? We really seem to be all over the place. How can we be helpful to your purpose?
I think everyone's been very helpful. I've been taking copious notes. So I think, I think everyone hearing other people's ideas and people being able to respond, I think there's a lot for us to now to go back, things that I've already heard, things I haven't heard, things, the council member obviously is very aware of certain things here, but I think some folks have given some good specifics. I think there's, a lot to work on. One thing I do want to mention as far as the amount of early voting sites, I definitely think that the high turnout has prompted a lot of folks to realize, we need more early sites and not just, on election day. So Councilman Kalos is putting forward legislation to significantly increase times, increase the amounts of sites. I think that these advocacy efforts in the next couple of weeks and months are going to help to push that kind of, push policies. Everyone's talking about going forward, looking towards, the post-pandemic, where things like early voting, are going to be affected. Councilman Ben Kalos was experienced what everyone did last election day, and he's definitely looking to respond to it. And I'm going to speak with him about all the ideas that were brought up today. So thanks very much to everybody, especially Sherry for getting stuff coordinated. But if there's any questions anyone has for me, I know the council member always gives an email address, policy@benkalos.com. So I get that, he gets that. And so if you want to propose anything, or you have any ideas you just want to send over to us. But yeah, I definitely learned a lot today. I'll admit I don't personally live on the Upper East Side, but I have worked there. I did go to school there, so it is my sort of home away from home. I think a lot of good ideas were put out today. So thanks.
So Adam, do you want us to come up with specific recommendations for sites? Do you want a resolution? I'm just looking for some direction how, you know, what, not, we could make recommendations to the full board. That's what I'm looking for. I hear, no, of course, you've gotten a lot of good suggestions, but is there, do you want us to do formally something? I'm just not sure how we.
If you'd like to do something formal, I mean, but as far as like sort of getting the specifics down, I mean, we sort of got that today, I think, which was.
Okay,
which was
great. Well, we didn't know you were
So-
on the call. That's great. All right, let me call on Anthony Cohn, the co-chair. He had some comments he wanted to make.
Okay, just very quickly. I think that obviously the most important thing is getting more early voting sites. I had one of the horrible experiences, although I guess middling horrible, 2.5 hours, not 5. But certainly some of my neighbors were there for 5 hours or more at Wagner. And I think that a lot of very kind of interesting and thought-provoking suggestions have come of this. It is doubtful that, given past experience, that we can get the Board of Elections to actually do anything. I think Cas's idea of the mobile exterior site sort of set up for the day or a few days is kind of an intriguing idea that probably works better in June than it would in November. But I think that there are a number of really huge unknowns still. Will everyone be able to vote by mail? The sort of excuse-free absentee ballot that we had last year. And then how many people will actually decide to vote early in person, depending on what that case is. So there's a lot of still unknowns still. Even to the matter of how badly, let's say, how frightened people will be, or reluctant, how reluctant people will be to vote in person in June, given the state of the pandemic. And that was really, it's sort of questions more than comments. I don't know what it'll be like in whatever that is, 4 or 5 months.
Okay, all right, we have 2 more people, Valerie and Ed. Valerie, you want to speak?
Yeah, I just want to go back, I mean, to sort of pick up where Anthony left off. I mean, we've got 4 months until a primary where we've got like 8 candidates running in each race. We've got like 8 for Council District 5. We're going to have a mayor's race that's filled with candidates. And we're going to be facing ranked choice voting for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think one of the early commentators mentioned, you know, that means that every line in an early voting line is going to be longer because no one is going to know how to do this. And I think the Board of Elections needs to think about that and have like some monitors at every voting site that sort of explain it as you're waiting online, or you have the ability to go over to a site and listen to something that's like maybe 2 minutes long to tell you how to do this. Because I know a lot of the poll workers aren't going to know how to do it. And if the rules are still the rules, you only have two chances to put it through and get it right. I don't know if they're going to change that rule, but if you make a mistake. And the other thing, you know, while I wasn't a poll watcher at the precinct, I definitely was there for 2 whole weeks watching the counting of mailed in ballots. I mean, this ranked choice voting has the possibility of invalidating many mail-in ballots because no one is going to know how to do this. And while I appreciate that you did a great job on the absentee ballot last time around, that's not going to be relevant this time because you're going to have to know how to do ranked choice voting in the mail-in. And what I saw being an observer down at the Department of Elections was that if you make like one mistake, your vote is out.
That's right.
What we saw the most was that people doing mail-in ballot, absentee, whatever you want to call it, for the first time, really didn't know how to fill it out. And I saw so many invalidated votes because people didn't know the rules. And this is what we're looking at. And we're less than 4 months till people are going to vote in an extremely important election for this city, because everybody knows that the Democratic primary is where it's at for the most part. If you don't vote in that election, who cares what you do in November? So we don't have a lot of time here. And I really don't see the DOE Board of Elections, excuse me, BOE, coming forward and really helping us here. I haven't seen anything about what the ballot's going to look like. There's no indication on a mail-in, because look, when we did Congressional District 12, we had over 65,000 mail-in ballots. And many of those were invalidated because people just didn't know how to fill them out. And I just have a crazy fear that this is going to go really sideways very quickly, and we don't have a lot of time. So
right, ballot, a simple thing like I did go on one of the city website. You can, if you vote, if you think you're going to be clever and vote for the same person 5 times, that's not your ballot is thrown out.
Right.
So it's a whole education. All right, let's go right to how do you think this committee should work on absentee, on choice ranked voting? As we said, we only have 4 months. I was thinking, if you remember, we had that excellent speaker from Common Cause, and I was going to reach out to her and see if she was talking on that. Now, I went on a program that Citizens Union did on choice ranked voting, and frankly, all they talked about was how this is advantageous to the minority community. They did not spend time on the process, which I think is what our responsibility is, to work on educating people on the process of how do you vote, choice, basically what it is. You have to put your vote for your first 5 candidates, and then they tally them. What gives me pause is that they don't even have software to do this, and they're going to be counting them by hand, I hear. So as Valerie said, this is a big issue for us. I'd like people to want to speak on how we should address choice ranked voting. As Adam said, he has the information he needs from us. So let's, because it's getting 8, it's almost 8 o'clock, and I really
but Sherry,
don't
before we do, actually, you had Ed's hand up from before.
Yeah, Ed. All right, let's have. Ed, you have something. Yes, Ed.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Max. Yes, to that point. So to build off your new point, Sherry, but to also address the former one as to early voting, let's put it in perspective. Okay, I'm the first to give the BOE a hard time, rightfully so. Anecdotally, just one last year from the state board, indicative as to absentee in the statute. For those of you election lawyers, this other lady I know did voter protection. Sounds like you may be an election attorney. You know the statute, New York State, very draconian, some of the toughest in the country. They know that in absentee ballots, in order to count them, it has to be postmarked. So everybody knew that there has to be a postmark. It's right there in the statute, clear as day, black and white. There it was. Yet you listen to the state board meetings, because I'm a geek and I do, 6 weeks in advance, someone raised the issue, even at the board meeting. Hey, what about the post office? Are we good? And the response was, don't worry about it. Everything's cool, baby. We got it. It was like Dino and, a celebrity roast. Don't worry about it. It's all great. But that was notwithstanding. I will say to the BOE, they did a admirable job, okay? Because the governor was handing out executive orders, as my poor wife had to listen to me rant, handing those things out like bounty paper towels for election law. I mean, they were coming out fast and furious every day, every week. He was issuing executive orders that were altering petition signatures and voting a week after the thing took effect. So I laud and give kudos to the Board of Elections for at least being nimble enough to deal with what was happening. Also, keep it in perspective, absentee ballots, mail-in absentee nomenclature. I know we go back and forth on this. It doesn't really matter. If you're mailing it in, you're voting absentee. So you can call it, as a contracts professor of mine said, you can call it spinach. It's still a contract. Mail-in absentee. The thing is, normally you only get 3 to 4% of absentee ballots every election cycle, which is why you can call these elections on election night. But last year, the numbers increased to 30, 40%. You're talking about a 10-fold increase. The statute also reads in New York State that you cannot begin counting those ballots until a full week after. Even though they're piling up and piling up and piling up, you can't count them. So I think we need to keep it in perspective. Yes, the BOE needs reform. God knows they need reform. But, I will give them a break. As to the early voting, tailored to voting things in our household, my wife went to Wagner, talked about the 5 hours, wore it as a badge of honor. I went to Marymount, did it in 5 minutes. So again, BOE, well done. Way to hear what was going on and make an adaptation. As to ranked choice voting, this, I would say, is something that this committee should focus on immensely. Aside from the fact that the BOE noted today in the special election in Queens, out of 95,000 potential voters, for those of you knowing that the special election is going on right now in Queens, 556 people have voted early in 4 days, just to give you a heads up. So turnout, oh, it's so great here in New York. But my point is ranked choice voting. We were sold the bill of goods. We can have that discussion later. But the point is, I was doing a webinar at the city bar on this. There is a professor in California at San Francisco State University who has been researching ranked choice voting. Couple of things, folks, so you know. The assertion was correct, Sherry. They are hand counting this because the software, which is supposed to be delivered, is not due till June. However, our wonderful reform-minded folks here in New York City plowing ahead forgot to note that we would have a boatload of special elections, and unfortunately, there's no stopping reform, so we have to hand count. Nevertheless, ranked choice voting, according to the research of this professor, does exactly the opposite on the very population that it seeks to help with turnout. It depresses turnout of minority and disproportionately economically affected communities by 3% initially, drives down voter turnout in those communities by 3%, according to the information. I'll send you his PowerPoint to put up on our line for us. The other thing is, this whole thing is premised on training, on telling people how to do this. So just to let you know, your assertion, Sherry, that you bullet vote, which is what you talked about, that's called bullet voting. You're like, hey, I don't care about these 37 candidates. I know who I like. I'm going to vote for who I like. That's called bullet voting, 1 to 5. That does not toss your ballot. What that does is that disenfranchises you, because if your chosen candidate finishes 6th, they're out of the game. You have no more vote because you're done. What will get kicked out of the machine is if you decide, because I happen to see your faces here, if you decide that you like Jill Eisner and Sherry Weiner and you vote them both number 1, the machine will kick out your ballot. That will kick out your ballot. That because you can't have 2 1s for 2 different candidates. So, you can have 1 to 5 for 1. My point of the long story is simply this: education, education, education. The voters are not getting it. There is a thing called Train the Trainers that the Campaign Finance Board is doing. I will tell you, I'm signed up for one tomorrow. You can go to the CFB website, sign up. I advise all the candidates, all the campaigns, all the elected officials, if they're out there, do it or not, election protection for yourself. Been doing it for years, poll workers, but also you better be out there training your targeted voters for ranked choice voting, because if you're relying on the CFB and the BOE for this, checks in the mail. Okay. So that's just all I would throw out there in terms of us, Sherry, on this ranked choice voting. I would focus on that and educating the public as much as possible, because people will either not take advantage of the choices, or as you said, they'll bullet vote and get disenfranchised.
Yeah, no, I think we have a big responsibility. I want to continue with this conversation just a few more minutes. Max, could you put up the list of the current early voting locations so people can
Sure.
have them just while we're talking? All right, I really want to have the conversation just on ranked choice voting and suggestions. How are we going to educate the public? I have the one suggestion of bringing in the speaker, open for others so I just wanted you to see the list. And can you move it? Oh, let's see. So the dates of early voting just are from Thursday, June 10th through Sunday, June 20th. Oh, no, I'm sorry, the setup, I guess it's later. No, that's delivery setup. Looks like Saturday, the 12th through Saturday, the 19th. Those are the days. And these are the current early voting in Manhattan. And we will be adding, Marymount would be adding there just so you have that information. Again, let's have a few more minutes on ranked voting, suggestions on how we should educate the public, and then we'll adjourn this meeting because it's already 8 o'clock and it's getting late. So let me see who's left. Michelle?
Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, I think that it was such a good meeting when you told everybody about the ballot and how to send in the ballot.
Yeah.
It was really a terrific job with a terrific speaker. And I think you need to plan for that again. And maybe may need more than one meeting. What I was going to suggest is, because the ballot is obviously going to change, meaning the format of the ballot, I wonder if we could have some input on the format. One of them being, the format here was to sign the envelope. I have to say, I couldn't figure out why that made sense. I did it. I followed the directions if you were going to, when I solicited a ballot, although I voted on election day. But I would like to make a suggestion that the signature, a person's signature, should be on the actual ballot, not on the envelope. Because one of the issues that had been happening is they would open the envelope, toss the envelope, and then you would have a ballot without a signature. And if for some reason, whatever that reason might be, that ballot was not recorded properly, it was then very difficult to go back and now find the envelope with the verifying signature. I couldn't figure out the logic to that. Maybe some of you smarter than I could explain to me why that was done that way.
Michelle, I can't imagine we'll have any input on that. I mean, I hear it certainly sounds like a good suggestion, but I think that's way above what
Excuse
we
me,
would have.
Sherry. Michelle.
Yeah.
If you sign the ballot, it's not a secret ballot anymore. And we have a system of secret ballots.
Oh, so
I mean, it's as dumb as that.
So you mean but you're handing it to the poll worker who is actually seeing your ballot anyway, because when they take those ballots, and half the people don't put them in the scanner, but the poll worker puts it in the scanner and they can actually see. But okay, Anthony, that's a good explanation.
That's a good, okay, good.
That's
All
the
right.
reason, that's the reason. But in a long run, it causes more problem than it solves. But at any rate, I think we should have some input in the format of the ballot, because if they're putting all these candidates, we're worried, and we're talking about the small print when we had just a few candidates. Can you imagine?
Right.
I mean, how is anybody going to read this, and how long is that going to take? It'll take a half hour per person to cast a vote. I mean, I think we should look into that, or have somebody come and talk to us about the format the ballot will take, the printing, everything about the ballot, in addition to process. I think we're going to need a few meetings on that.
Oh, definitely. We're going to start having meetings. All right, Alita? Max on.
Thank
on
you.
your-
Thank you. I think the PSA that you did, Shari, was really good. If you do something like that carefully with ranked choice voting and explain it, and you do the same thing that you did at a meeting where you actually show what it's like to fill it out and what it means, and maybe there's some kind of demonstration that you could do, and then it's up on the website for people to click on whenever they want to, and maybe the elected officials could send links in their newsletters, because I think everyone is aware that this is a new concept and it's difficult for people to be able to understand. Perhaps I'm sure that I don't understand a lot of the variables, and especially the way that Ed put it. If it is just if it does have the potential to disenfranchise people, then we certainly need to know as much about what the proper procedure is as possible.
Yeah, the problem is that we got the ballot so late before the last election that we're going to have to start to do this before we actually have the ballot, but certainly repetition, we're going to need to do that. Okay, a couple more people and then we're going to call it. And wow, we have a lot of people. Okay, please keep it short. It is 8 o'clock and after 8, and we're trying to be respectful. Barbara Rudder.
Am I okay? Do you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, good. Very quickly, there's two things about ranked voting. It's either very simple or very complicated. The very simple is you can vote up to 5 people. You can vote for 1, you could vote for 2, you could vote for 5 in the order you want. The other is, how does it work? When the lowest person ranks that, what do you want to, I think one of the things we should decide is, how much do you want to train people? Do you want to give exactly the mechanics how it works? The only second thing is, I can't believe they're doing hand counting. I know the For Freedom Democratic Club it gets the results in 3 minutes of an election because they have the software. So there is software around, and maybe we can say got somebody else's software if your software isn't coming.
Okay, Russell, our chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I think so. I think the reason that they have to count by hand, the issue with the software is it's not reliable enough to recognize people writing by hand the different numbers. I suspect that that's the obstacle, right? And if you're talking about people voting online, that's all digital and it's much easier. And what you need is a scanner that's actually going to be able to reliably pick up somebody running 1 and 2 and so on and so forth. I think you can't have that. I guess just other points on ranked choice voting. Yeah, I mean, I think we will have to sort of explain these precise mechanics of it. I think the big question that people have, and the big, I think, misconception about it, is it really doesn't allow for bullet voting. And I think that's the big question, essentially, that essentially there's no disadvantage to your top choice to ranking further choices. I think that's something that people don't fully understand, or I think that's one of the big questions about it. But in any event, I think you have to basically explain the mechanics of it to make that
Yeah,
clear.
I think that's what our responsibility is. Is explaining the mechanics. Yeah.
One last minor point is, I think we'll know what the ballot looks like ahead of time, and hopefully we'll have a reasonable amount of time. I think the simplest way to try and clarify it or make it easier for people is showing people what the ballot's actually going to look like, which we will know at some point. And then,
it was the last time it was very late. We had to wait to do our demonstration because we had nothing to show, but we can always keep our fingers crossed.
That's it. Yeah, just as soon as we get it. We can
and hope. Maybe, Ben Kalis's office can have some pull, but we really had trouble getting a sample ballot. All right, moving quickly. Let's see, Joe Franco.
Hi, just real quickly, in terms of educating people, I do know because of my own involvement in like my own congregation, our social action committee is making sure that we hold several Zoom education series on ranked choice voting. And we are getting our PowerPoint, whatever presentation from, we're not reinventing the wheel. And I really think it would be, a tremendous public service for what you've described, this educational piece. Find ways to get it out so that all of the community organizations out there can use it to
Yeah.
educate their members, whether churches, temples, mosques, etc. It really, it really should come from Board of Elections. Should be a bipartisan, effort. But I think we, at least in, our area of the city, can very much use the city council members office, various entities to really get the word out to organizations. Schools can educate parents through their PTA, parents associations. I just put that out there.
No, we definitely need to work. Last time we worked with the community, and we will continue to do that. I think we're going to have to plan on having a meeting every month until the election, and just keep on going over it and over again. Faith Fraser.
Hi, it's Faith Fraser again. Just one question. Well, first of all, I raised my hand because yes, it's a secret ballot. I actually counted a lot of those ballots. Secondly, do we know if there's a deadline for when the ballot has to be available?
No, I do not know. I just know that when we requested it for the last time, it just wasn't finalized. I just think it's just the usual Board of Elections incompetence. But no, I don't know when it has to be, but we'll just keep on trying. I think especially with so many candidates, it's going to take them quite a while to get it finalized.
Right. The reason I ask is because I know as a poll worker, and Jill can verify this too, we don't ever see it until the day before either. So I just wondered if there is an actual deadline, just the way there is for candidates to file, to run, etc.
It's a good question. I certainly would look into it. But again, I'm just basing it on my last experience, for the last election, and it just wasn't available. But we'll keep on trying. All right, Craig, do you have Craig, do you need to speak again?
Yeah, hi.
Before we
I have
close out?
I have a number of thoughts that I'd like to share. Before Ed even said it, I had educated jotted down in my notes. I'll get to that in a minute, but I'm actually really concerned about the disenfranchisement potential of this. I personally like the idea of ranked choice voting and what it means for people to be able to have that ability to provide backups and the fundamental reasons for doing it. But I'm really concerned that people need assurances that their vote will count. And if people don't know what they're doing, I'm not sure if people are going to have confidence in this, especially the first time that it's taking place. And I'm actually more concerned about absentee voters. So I guess one of my main questions is, and this may be a little naive, and I think I know the answer to it, but based on the discussion, I'm getting the sense that if someone is to go vote in person, if it's meant to be a secret ballot, if they were to try to feed a machine, assuming that we're ready to feed a machine and it's being counted electronically, if it generates an error message, are people going to know what that error message is? Are people going to have the ability to get assistance for someone to help scan a ballot, or is a machine going to be able to generate a specific error and point out why it's being rejected? Because now it's a lot more complicated. And between that unknown and the possibility that someone may spend 10 minutes trying to do ranked choice votes and then have it rejected, and then they have to submit a whole ballot again for all the different offices, it's going to, I fear, turn a lot of people off. So I think we need to go to great lengths to make sure that we're not going to disenfranchise people who are trying to vote and then just throw their hands up and surrender to the process because they just are unable to. And I'm more concerned in some ways about absentee voters because they're not going to have that ability to do it. They're going to send a ballot out in the mail to be returned. And what happens if it's returned and it's not filled out properly? Is someone going to try to interpret it, or is it going to just be rejected because it wasn't filled out correctly? I think we need to have an understanding of what the process is and the different decision trees, if you will, as far as if A happens, what happens next, and how does a possible remedy.
Well, in the last
We should
election, they had a
have
responsibility
multi-pronged
to
approach.
correct it, right? Ed, you would know, right? That they had, yeah, why don't we let Ed speak? He's very knowledgeable where they had to correct the balance.
You're able to speak, Ed.
Yeah. They've done a lot of changes to the law. I think, a lot has changed as a result of what happened last year, and the legislature is changing the ability to cure. They call it a cure period for you.
Yes.
The very thing, look, and again, on the signature, Michelle, the reason why you signed the back of the envelope, and they keep those envelopes with the ballots, okay? Because I was out in Brooklyn for, that's a week I'll never get back in my life. I was out there in that warehouse out there in Red Hook. They keep the envelopes together, but the signature is your ID. That's what we don't, that's the one thing in New York we don't do, is we don't make you show your ID. And to the lady who mentioned the ballot, you're right, but there is a statutory mandate. It's in the political calendar. And if you want to know what the political calendar is, you go to New York State Board of Elections website, you can find it. It tells you every date and the statute reference as to when things happen. In New York State, the ballot must be certified. Okay, for the primary, I'm looking right at the calendar. The certification of the primary ballot by the state board must happen by April 28th, according to section 4110 of the election law. And under section 414, the county board must certify by the next day. So New York City will have a certified ballot by April 29th. They have
but
to.
We won't have a sample, Ed. That's what happens.
That's going to give you. I'm not saying it's going to give you a sample. I'm just telling you, is there a deadline of when you're going to have a
difference? We need the sample. Yes.
Now, I would also say, there's, my wife's not in earshot, so I can use this phrase. There's more than one way to skin a cat. And so knocking at the door. You could use the sample ballot they're using in the special elections right now. Those are very good to use as well. I mean, you have those, and you can't change that format. I know Michelle wants to change the format. That's not going to happen. They're not going to let you have a new format come June.
Yeah.
They're using the format now. So it's going to read vertically by candidate.
That's a good idea to get that. Yeah.
Horizontally 1 to 5. And here's the other thing. For those of you on the call who are candidates, if you finish in the 6th spot, for those of you running for mayor in the 40-person field, I should say, if you finish from 6 to 29, you're in the same boat. Okay, you're irrelevant. You need to be in the top 2 or 3 to be in the ranked choice game, because top 5 counts. If you're number 6, doesn't matter. Just to say, and whatever. But just so you know, there's some practical ways to use the ballots on that.
Okay, Alita, did you want to speak again?
Can I just finish the last point I was going to make before we?
Oh, sure.
went
I'm
off
sorry, Craig. Okay,
that's okay. So just if there aren't going to be sample ballots, what I was going to suggest is if BOE can be very aggressive in mailings with and creating a video that could run perhaps on a constant loop on NYC TV or cable access channels, and if everyone were sent a mailing with a website link or a QR code, so people can have easy access to be able to find these videos and also obviously identify where they can see it on TV. Let people actually find easy ways to be able to be educated before. And I think that's really the key to do it, to give people as many. We can talk about doing it on a community board level as much as we want, and that's great, but we're going to reach a fraction of people who are looking to vote, and we need a citywide strategy to be able to attack this issue.
How about if anybody comes across a good website or a good video on this, let's get them to the board office and let's start advertising. I think it's a great idea. Let's get the word out. So let's everybody, start looking for an explanation, because many groups are having programs and doing education on this. All right, who do we got? Rita? Rita Popper, and then I think we're going to close out this meeting and plan on having one next month and try to wrap this, get a handle on this topic. Rita, do you want something to say?
Yes, the scanners, and I'm a scanner, when the ballot is rejected because it's not correct, you look at it and you tell them why it's not correct. And they have to go back and get another ballot and start all over again. They can only get 3 ballots. That's it. Or else they have to go down to a judge and get an order to get another ballot. And they have to do this all before 9 o'clock at night. That's number one. Number two, the Board of Education really is, they don't have, they're not an advertising agency. They should go out and get an advertising agency who will do a PSA on TV, because 98% of the population has a TV and not the entire population has a computer. So those are just suggestions.
All right, Lita, why don't you finish us out?
Yeah, it's just about education. So the schools, I think you mentioned, or Jill Franco had mentioned, senior centers, Lenox Hill Neighborhood House, the Isaacson Home Centers, any place where you can reach a group of people is essential. And having it, maybe you could do something short that could be a tag along for anything that's on MNN. It's just a way of trying to get to as many people as possible, because there's very low turnout in June anyway for primaries, and no one understands what this is at this point. It's a word, and I don't even know what people are hearing when they hear ranked choice voting. So it's essential that you have as many meetings as possible, and even if you're on new topics, that at least part of it be devoted to trying again and again and again to show us all how to fill out these ballots and what they mean. And maybe there are people from the well, we're not supposed to be political, but to get good speakers, I'm sure that Ed knows a bunch of people, but it's really, it's a minefield. We're not going to duplicate the turnout that we had for the presidential election by a fraction of it, but for anyone who goes, if they don't understand what it means, we're in big trouble. So thank you very much for letting me speak.
Okay, well, this is certainly a topic that needs to be explored. I'd like to thank Max and Will for hosting this meeting for us. I will get a date from Will for a meeting in March. And again, if you come across any sites that we should recommend, or if you hear of any speakers that we should invite, please let me know. That's how we got that great speaker the last time. Barbara Chalky had heard her and we brought her in. I'm going to reach out. I would assume Common Cause is doing the same sort of thing, and she was excellent. So thank you all for a very informative meeting, and I'm glad Adam was on, that we gave him a lot of things to think about, and great. And good night, everybody, and stay safe. Good night. Thank you all.
Good night.
Bye-bye.